For years now, 49 years roughly, Iran, since the Shah was basically chased out, Iran has been led by clerics. And it's a religious Shia nation. And, as opposed to the Sunni Muslims. People think all Muslims are the same. It's about like saying all Christians, Catholics, and Protestants are all the same, where there's really a lot of vast differences in some of the theology. And their eschatology is a belief that their version of the Messiah is going to come with Jesus, I might add. Great time for Satan to impersonate Christ. And they're calling Trump the Antichrist, and they use even the word Armageddon is going to happen. And they're looking for this big battle, but they think they're all supposed to gather in Damascus. It's a really strange arrangement of how they portray things. So one reason that Israel basically took out their leadership, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and then not only his secession local leaders, but then when they began to gather the clerics to have another cleric lead, they went in and they bombed that next layer. And basically Israel says, if you are looking for another religious rule, expect us to assassinate them. It's very bold. They usually don't say we're going to assassinate your leaders. They're looking for someone who's going to be willing to give the people freedom. And we should say right here, just let me rant for a moment. I've read some great testimonies of Christians in Iran, and when I say great, I mean amazing, but the persecution that they suffer and what they've endured in prison during this regime, it's just awful. Many, many Christians have been imprisoned or killed for their faith. The Iranian government, just recently, the numbers are all over the place. Anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people, protesters, were just mowed down. So it's been the clerics and a military state that the Republican Guard that's been, the Iranian Guard that's been attacking their own people. And so, and they also control a lot of the flow of oil that must go through the Straits of Hormuz there. In fact, what we're dealing with now is a combination of political, religious, and economic that has profound implications. So, how do Christians look at this? We have a map on the screen here. You can kind of see that there's Iran, and the northern part of that was, the Iranian or the Persian Empire. And they came into power. Now, the Persians are not the enemies of God's people through the Bible. Haman he was in the Persian court, he tried to annihilate the Israelites, but of course, Cyrus set them all free. And so they've had a love-hate relationship with the Persians through history. And there's a lot of Christians in Persia. Matter of fact, the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit's poured out, it talks about the Medes and the Peres that were gathered there among the 16 languages that are mentioned. They were ostensibly Jews that were living in Persia that brought Christianity back to Persia. And so it dates back quite a ways. Daniel talks about praying. I think it's chapter 10, where the angel Gabriel says, we heard your prayer at the beginning, and for 21 days, Michael has been at battle with the prince of Persia. Well, that wasn't literally an angel named Michael battling with the king. It's talking about a spiritual battle. But it's interesting that Persia's mentioned in that. Now, people need to be careful not to superimpose the ancient borders of Persia, or, if we read in the last chapter of, last section of Daniel 11, people are looking there because once you get to chapter 12, Michael stands up, time of trouble, resurrection, it's the end. And they look at the last verses in Daniel chapter 11, and it mentions all these Muslim countries, Ethiopia, Libya, and the Edomites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians. People are saying, is this it? Are we reading Daniel 11 right now? Well, the borders of those countries have changed a lot from Bible times. Jordan completely covers the area that was Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And there probably is a spiritual application there because Edomites, Moabites, and Ammonites were loosely related to the Israelites through Abraham. So I just want to caution people about trying to read. I'm listening to some of my evangelical friends, and they're going, this is it. Iran is mentioned in the Battle of Ezekiel, along with Gog and Magog, the Persians anyway. And they're saying this is it. This is we're leading up China, Russia, Gog, Magog, Persians. And the Chinese are worried about their oil, and the Russians are worried about their oil flow right now. And this is going to be the start of World War III. Well, let's hope not. I'm not a prophet, but we're hoping that this is brief. But there are prophetic ramifications, I think, to what's happening now. So I'll get to that in a minute. Maybe you could tell our friends once more about the free offer and remind them about the questions. Any questions coming in?
That's right. Yes, we do have questions coming in, Pastor Doug, and thank you for sending those questions. If you would like to post the question, we'll put that QR code up on the screen again. Just scan that with your phone. It's real easy, and it'll take you to our app, and you just type in your email, and then you can post your questions. And we've got lots of questions that are coming in related to Bible prophecy and what's happening. Questions about Daniel chapter 11, the last few verses. We might talk about that. And also some other things related to Bible prophecy and what's happening. Also want to remind you about our free offer, the magazine. It's called America in Bible Prophecy. It's free. This is our free offer this evening. Just scan the QR code that you see on your screen or text the word America 26 to the number 40544. Again, you text the word America 26 to the number 40544 and you'll be able to get the magazine.
So let me share very quickly some ways that I think that this could have prophetic implications. You got to stay with me, friends. First, I want to remind people that there is a spiritual component to this. We're going to put a map up on the screen just so you have a visual of how the Arab world in the Middle East is divided. You've got your Sunni and your Shia majority. Iran, you can see, is a Shia majority. Their theology is different from Saudi Arabia. You notice that two of the chokeholds for the oil of the world must go through either the Red Sea, the Sinai, the Suez Canal coming down through the Red Sea, or through the Straits of Hormuz. Yemen and Iran are both stationed where they have been lobbing missiles threatening the free flow of oil through the world. And that's a major problem. Now we'll put up, to show you the countries that are getting missiles right now, we have that as our next slide that we'll put up on the screen. Of course, the U.S. is based there largely with their Navy and some of their bases. Iran is being blasted right now. 9 out of 10 missiles are being aimed at Iran, but Iran's retaliating still. And they've had bombs land in Iraq, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and of course Israel. And so that whole area is a hot spot. It's interrupted international travel, but this is where a good deal of the oil of the world comes from. Now, just some little amazing facts, friends, about oil and how important is oil, and why you've probably seen in North America the gas prices are starting to spike. No one wants to pay more, but that doesn't worry me too much because I think that no war goes on forever. I think that's going to be temporary. Fuel, of course, the oil industry supplies the gasoline for our cars, diesel for the trucks, jet fuel for the airplanes, marine fuel for the ships that are moving the oil, heating oil, petroleum, gas, propane, natural gas, kerosene, and roughly half of every barrel of oil becomes transportation fuel. Now that's important because virtually everything that you're looking at around you now or sitting on was either moved by or is made of oil. People forget polyurethane, polypropylene, PVC, all the pipes and the plumbing, polystyrene, polyester, I think ABS also doesn't mention it, nylon, clothing, medical supplies. I mean, we are surrounded with petroleum products. And so this is a battle, I think, that is not just a battle over a religious war, but this is a battle for political superiority and control and economic power. That plays into last day prophecy. So the next slide on the screen, just so people understand some things that are happening here, it shows how many barrels of oil a day are being produced. This is per day, not per week or per month. The U.S., 19.4 million barrels a day. Canada, 5.7 million. You'll see the blue there. Mexico, that's basically North America. Then you can go to Saudi Arabia, 11. UAE 3.9 million, Iraq 4.4 million, Iran 4.6 million. And so much of that goes through the Straits of Hormuz. When it says other at the top of the screen, that would include Venezuela. Their production, though they've got one of the greatest reserves, is not a lot right now because the infrastructure is broken down. But don't miss the point that just in the last month, that the Venezuelan president was basically taken out of his country. As of this week, Doug Bergman, who met in Venezuela and says, I've got good news as of today, says we're going to have free-flowing oil from Venezuela. That's a threat to China. And so now go to the next slide, and I think you're going to find this very interesting. Here's where you've got the greatest proven oil reserves in the world. You'll notice the black would be the most, and as it gets lighter, it's less. Venezuela, the most. Canada, quite a bit. And then you can see over there, Iran and Saudi Arabia. A lot of oil. And then the final slide we can put up here tells about their proven oil reserves. Look at the top 3 or 4 highest oil reserves in the world. Venezuela, it's not producing the most because after they took it over from the American oil companies, it just started, the infrastructure fell apart. This week, Shell and maybe Exxon, I forget, some other major oil companies met with our Secretary of the Interior that deals with this in Venezuela to rebuild Venezuela. We're going to put that slide back up again. I want people to see how much oil. You got Venezuela, Saudi Arabia. America has a friendly relationship. Iran is number 3 for proven reserves of oil. And then Canada, that's why we wanted a pipeline back during the last administration that would go down to Houston. Iraq, UAE. It's interesting, friends, what you're seeing now is America that has, I think I did have actually another slide. Yeah, America has the most military bases in the world right now. The United States has roughly 750 to 800 military bases outside of North America. That's not in our country, around the world. And that's more than all the other countries of the world combined. And America spends more on our military than the other 9 countries, 9 next countries combined. So I don't think too many people will question that America is a superpower. How does this play into final prophecy? That little horned beast in Revelation 13 that we believe is the United States, and I'm an American, you now got your citizenship.
I do.
We love our country, but it's going to be working with the first beast, and that means it's going to have a lot of power if it's compelling the whole world to worship a certain way. So what's happening right now? We're seeing a tremendous play for power and influence and economic resources.
You know, Pastor Doug, you mentioned Revelation 13. Let me just read a few verses, and you might want to comment on this. This is the second beast, the one that comes up from the earth. The first beast in Revelation 13 comes up from the sea. We know that according to a number of identifying marks that represents the papal power. But the second beast is the United States, and this is what it says. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. So there's a change that occurs in the United States where it begins to enforce a certain type of worship that really supports the first beast. But here's the interesting part, Pastor Doug. And he exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So this beast power, we understand to be the United States, becomes a global superpower to the point where it can force all of the world to eventually receive the mark of the beast. Well, Pastor Doug, in reality, what other country in the world has the military might, the economic power, and now access to the oil reserves that really make a difference other than the United States? It is an incredible power. And it's not afraid to flex that power, as we've seen just in the last few months what's happening.
Yeah, I think everybody knows that on the cusp of some kind of international crisis, after 9/11, or there's some major incident, people become very frightened. They become very religious. And I've just seen, since I was actually in Indonesia when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And then by the time Karen and I got back home, they had the funeral. You and I commented on that. that here you had the whole American cabinet, basically. All the leaders were there. And much of what was said was inspirational, you couldn't help but note that you had political leaders. It was almost like a religious rally. And I should just add that as of a couple of weeks ago, I was in Nashville for the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. We go almost every year, and I have been going for over 30 years now. And presidents have spoken there. The speaker this year was Pete Hegseth, which is, of course, the Secretary for War. And it was a very strong religious overtone. I think he even said at one point, there is no separation of church and state. And I was with some friends, we kind of looked at each other. And, he said some things that I would probably agree with, that, it's good to have chaplains in the military and so forth. But it seems like there is a drift in the country back towards religion. And many things about that would be positive, but if that pendulum swings too far and people start telling others how to worship, then it really becomes problematic prophetically.
Well, let me read the next verse, same chapter. It says, "And it deceives those that dwell upon the earth by the signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast." We spoke about that. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and he should cause the beast both to speak and to cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And then it talks about a mark that he enforces upon those. But here's the point that I wanted to make. It says that they can't buy or sell unless they receive the mark. So this has economic connections. You can see the power of the United States, not only personal, individuals not being able to buy and sell, but could this refer to nations that don't come on board with this new world order, that they suffer some kind of sanctions?
Yeah, Revelation is largely dealing not just with people, but it's talking about nations. You go to Revelation 17, it talks about the kings of the earth that are committing fornication with the great whore. And it's talking about these kings, they're nations. And so when it says that no man might buy or sell, not only will that be easy for nations to enforce on individuals, but what does it mean when one nation says that they're going to have economic sanctions or tariffs against another nation unless they cooperate? You cannot buy or sell on the international market. And right now, as of today, and I think my friend is watching, I won't call him out, a friend that's a banker I spoke to today, and he said things are happening very quickly. 99% of all the cryptocurrency in the world is based upon the US dollar. And people are storing and banking this stable coin against the US dollar. And the financial influence of the United States, especially if, let's just suppose, hypothetically, that Iran finally says, all right, we're willing to play nicely with the other nations. We're going to pick a leader that will allow religious freedom. We're going to start trading with other nations like Iraq did following the war. And America can have a base over there. And everything going through the Straits of Hormuz and the Sinai Peninsula by the Red Sea, and Venezuela, the tremendous control and power is really going to be something. So, I'm praying it doesn't escalate into a war with Iran and China, or you better make sure your house is in order. But I do think that this is paving the way for the last days and for setting the stage where Satan might want to show up and impersonate Christ.
Right. Well, I think one thing we can be sure of, this is not the end, because, the Bible does describe that the second beast of Revelation 13 continues to grow in power, and the mark of the beast is in force. So this is not the final war. I mean, it might seem that way, but I think just the way the war is going right now,
there'll be a battle about commandments and big religious overtones that start coming in.
There's going to be worship connected. And of course, the gospel is to be preached to all the world. And that would include some of these countries that we haven't been able to really share the gospel in, like Iran and some of these, China, some of these other countries, North Korea. So there's a possibility those things are going to open up. But it is interesting that the United States is gaining political power and just flexing that strength that she has. And it's amazing. What other country can stand against the United States?
Yeah,
Just-
exactly. And, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there were, 70 years that evangelists could not go to Russia. And I remember in 1992, when the Iron Curtain fell, our church began to send out an SOS evangelists. They said, we've got the whole 11 time zones of Russia have opened up to evangelism. The harvest is great, the laborers are few. And Karen and I said, we'll go. And we went over there and did some evangelistic meetings in Stavropol for like 6 weeks. It'd be wonderful if Iran opened up, and you can get translators, and we could be preaching the gospel over there. So that would be a wonderful outcome. And we're praying that they get a moderate leader in the country that will allow freedom of worship. And we're not saying the whole country needs to give into any one religion, but let people practice in America according to the dictates of their conscience. That'd be wonderful. We should pray for that.
All right, Pastor Doug, let's
take a
look
question
at a
before
couple
we
of
go to our
questions
break.
here. Yeah. First one that we have is, could modern Israel become a part of the image of the beast of Revelation 13?
The image of the beast, of course, is going to center with the largest religion in the world, and that's Christianity. And the most powerful part of that is in Rome. There are more Roman Catholics than any other single group. So there are about 2.3 billion Christians in the world. There are 1.7 billion Muslims. Those are your two principal religions. Israel, I think, is going to make peace with that power at some point.
And maybe just to add, Pastor Doug, the Bible doesn't say that everyone becomes Roman Catholic at the end. I
Right.
think we need to be clear on that. There is a cooperative relationship. And if you look at Bible prophecy, the evangelicals in America are one of the leading groups to bring about these religious laws that are really traditions created by the Roman Church, but they are embraced by these various religious groups. So there are going to be Hindus, there's going to be Muslims, there's going to be Jews, that at the end of time will somehow reach some kind of an agreement with the papal power, according to Bible prophecy. So don't look at everyone needing to convert to Christianity in order for these prophetic truths to be true.
Yeah, and there's, I just came back, as I mentioned, from NRB, and one of the largest advertisers at NRB is Israel. Now, this is the evangelical get-together in North America of the religious broadcasters, and Israel says, they're our best friends. A lot of evangelicals are saying, Israel must succeed, and pray for Israel if you want to have peace, and they're very strong supporters of Israel, and we've been there before, and we're hoping to go back. So it's a wonderful country and a lot of history there, but agreed. It doesn't mean that all the Jews are suddenly going to say, we're going to become Christians. Not sure exactly where the false Christ is going to come in, but it'll look like the Messiah to them, I suppose.
And of course, most of the Jews, even in Israel, are secular Jews. You do have the staunch religious Jews, but there are many secular Jews in Israel as in the United States. And they're not necessarily trying to support they're not supporting the idea of building a temple in Jerusalem again and starting up the sacrificial system.
Yeah, a lot of confusion about who Israel is today and spiritual Israel, but we got a brief. Well, Pastor Ross, we've been talking a little bit about what's going on now with the war in the Middle East, Iran in particular, and we're praying for the people there. War is an ugly business, and I think it would be wonderful for the people there to have freedom and to have a regime change, but it is not painless. So a lot of people suffer, and I'm hoping that all of our friends are praying for those that are struggling over there, and for the servicemen and women that are serving in the military that are in harm's way, so to speak, in this whole process.
All right. Well, we've got some questions that are coming plenty, and thank you for all your questions. All right. We'll start with the first, probably the most obvious. Is Israel, or the state of Israel, in Bible prophecy?
Yes, I believe it is. Now, I think we need to be very careful. When you read in the prophecies about Israel, you're talking about two things. You get the nation of Israel, and Paul makes it pretty clear. Does God still have a plan for the Jews? And he said, absolutely. God is not done with Israel. But then at the same time, there is a new spiritual Israel, where the Bible tells us that if you are Christ, you are Abraham's seed. And he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly. And Jesus said, or maybe it was John the Baptist said, God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. And so it's not literal DNA that God saves. God saves us based on our hearts and our conversion. But as far as the people and the descendants of Abraham, I think God still has his eye on them. And I believe there's going to be a great revival. Now, in Jesus' day, there were Jews that were the children of God that were following Christ. And in Jesus' day, he said some of them were children of the devil. So you don't want to think just because someone's Jewish, or even if they say they're Christian, that they really are a believer or not, because God looks on the heart.
All right. Next question kind of ties in with that. It says, why is the Christian church or the church so supportive of the state of Israel?
Well, they read the promises that you find, especially in the Old Testament, but there's some references in Romans chapter 9 and 10, but where it says, Abraham is blessed forever, and that we're to pray for the blessing of Jerusalem, and that he that blesses you will be blessed, he that curses you will be cursed. And then they carry that on down to the modern state of Israel. And I don't believe that, I'm going to probably get letters on this, but I don't believe that we should care about or pray for one nation more than another. I do pray that God will protect and bless Israel and Jerusalem. I am half Jewish, for my mother's Jewish, for anyone watching. But I read in the New Testament that God is no respecter of persons, and that God has made of one blood all nations. And so when you become a child of the Lord, then we're all part of the same people. Now, what makes the Jews different is that Jesus said to the Samaritan woman, salvation is of the Jews, meaning they were guardians of the Scripture. And Paul says that the Jewish nation, they were the guardians of the oracles of God. And so God committed to the Jewish nation the truth of the Scriptures. And so in that sense, they were specially chosen. But at Pentecost, when they preached to all the nations, and God told Peter, I'm talking about this tomorrow morning, God told Peter, don't call the Gentiles unclean. The gospel really goes everywhere now.
I think part of the reason might also be a misunderstanding of Bible prophecy. Many evangelical Christians think that Daniel chapter 9 speaks about the Antichrist power, which they look for still in the future, this power that's to arise, that would sit in the temple in Jerusalem, and he would bring an end to the sacrifices that would be restarted in Jerusalem. So they take it very literal. And in order for that to happen, well, the temple has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And so there's more interest amongst evangelical Christians in rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem than probably amongst the Jews in Israel. Because, of course, where the temple is, well, that's now the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
The second most sacred site to the Muslims.
Right.
So a misunderstanding of that prophecy, it's got nothing to do,
it's one verse.
Scripture, it's got nothing to do with the building of a literal temple in Jerusalem. It has to do with God's people, and it actually met its fulfillment in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and also Christ the Messiah is also referred to in those prophecies.
Jesus said there wouldn't be one stone left upon another.
That's right.
He said, your house is left to you desolate. The Jews do not practice a sacrificial system anymore. They don't have the Aaronic priesthood anymore. And I think that verse is 2 Thessalonians, where it said, then that wicked one will sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. It's talking about God's church, the temple. Christ is a cornerstone. You and I are the temple. There is an Antichrist power that tries to sit over the church. And if you look at the Pope on his throne, he's got an angel on the right and an angel on the left, like the Ark of the Covenant. And all of the Protestant reformers, they believe that that prophecy was fulfilled in the papacy.
You know, Pastor Doug, we were actually there. It was 2 years ago. We were in Rome, and we went to St. Paul's Cathedral.
Right.
Which is not St. Peter's.
It's not in the Vatican, right.
Yeah, it's just outside. It's in Rome. And we were wandering around, and we're walking, and each of the cathedrals has a throne where only the Pope can sit when he's there at that church. And I remember we were walking along, and I looked over to the side, and I bumped you and said, Pastor, look at that. That is where that throne is. It's in St. Paul's Cathedral. That's got the two golden angels on either side. And it's
like
this
the Ark of the
marble
Covenant.
Throne, and he's, that's the throne where the Pope sits. It was just amazing.
Yeah,
Took a
it's
picture of it.
sitting in the position of God, and of course, the Pope's title, Vicar for Christ, Vicarius Filii Dei. The title for the Holy Spirit is the Vicar for Christ, or Jesus would be the representative for the Father, but there is no man that
Right.
assumes that position. So that's what the Protestant reformers. So take that up with Martin Luther, John Wesley, Charles Spurgeon, Zwingli, Calvin. Who else should I mention? We are right in the same ballpark with them in our interpretation of that verse. Modern evangelicals have drifted a long way from where the Protestant roots were.
All right, another question that we have. We knew this one would come up. Can you please explain the king of the south and the king of the north that's referred to in Daniel 11 as relates to what's happening now?
Okay, well, we're venturing on volatile ground here. Personally, first of all, Pastor Ross and I want to be the first to say we are not prophets or the sons of prophets. Your dad might be a prophet. He's a pretty good guy, but mine was not a prophet. But anyway, there's a couple of views among remnant Christians. You know, most agree that the king of the north would represent the papacy. And so there's not a lot of disagreement there when you track Daniel chapter 10 into Daniel chapter 11. And you've got the battle between the Greek Empire in the south, and it shifts more to the Italian and the Roman Empire in the north. And then it shifts from more Arabian territory. And so somewhere it goes from the literal powers to the spiritual powers. But I personally think that you just look at history and terrorism and the battles in the last 50 years, and with Christianity being the number one religion and Islam being very evangelistic, and they're gaining on Christianity. The Catholic Church is losing followers in Europe, but it's still very strong in South America. Now we have an American Pope. I think that the king of the south is Islam working in connection with other powers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, Pastor Doug. Of course, we're talking about Revelation 11:40 onwards, and we need to tell our viewers this is still future events, so it's difficult for us to know for sure. Maybe that's why there's a little speculation. But when you look at the king of the north, you mentioned the papal power is sort of the religious side of things, but the papal power has always worked through secular armies or governments. And so many see in the king of the north the religious side being Christianity, sort of led by the papal power, but having the backing of some refer to as NATO or the United States of America, providing the military strength and the ideology of the religion coming from the papal power. And then the opposite of that would be Islam, being the king of the south, providing the religious side of things. But who are the allies of Iran and some of these countries in the Middle East that are hostile to America and Israel? Well, it would be China and Russia, which provides more of the military background, which of course they're the ones who are providing arms to these nations. So you can almost see a division there, and some have identified that as possibly being the two divisions, and it's centering in the Middle East right now. So it is interesting.
Goes back to Abraham, where there's like two branches of peoples that come out of Abraham. And it's interesting, Ishmael has 12 sons. And Jacob has 12 sons. And the center of Islam, the holy place is Mecca. And it's either Rome or Jerusalem for the other group. And the Crusades. Now, is Islam mentioned in prophecy? In Revelation?
Is. Absolutely. Yep. Revelation, we talk about the trumpets, and you have the fifth and the sixth trumpet. The fifth trumpet has been identified as the rise of Islam during the time of Muhammad. It's a very descriptive, interesting passage. But under the sixth trumpet, you got the expansion of Islam during the time of the Ottoman Empire, or the Turks, and they marched all the way up to Constantinople and right on the banks. I mean, they were even threatening Austria for a while. And so it's interesting how that Islam would arise and divert the powers of Europe that were persecuting the Protestants. They would have to go fight against these Islamic invaders that were coming from the east, allowing Protestantism to grow in Germany and in England and some of these other countries. So it is interesting as a counterbalance.
Yeah.
And of course, Islam has always been a force to reckon with there. And the ideology, very devout. Even now, you see the results in the news, how that the Iranians are just being decimated, and yet there is still a very strong rebellion, at least what's been said. We're going to fight to the death.
Yeah, very zealous. So Jesus said, first thing he says in Matthew 24 about his second coming, he said, there'll be false Christs and false prophets. So I have, you and I have Muslim friends, and we love and respect them. but we'd have to respectfully disagree that their prophet is a true prophet.
Right.
And so probably one of the greatest false prophets would be Muhammad, according to Jesus in the Bible.
Yep. And of course, not all Islams believe the same. As you mentioned, there is division, and there's a lot of bloodshed that has occurred over the years between the Sunni and the Shia Muslims in the Middle East.
There was a big war between Iraq and Iran years ago, yeah.
That's right, dealing with this issue. All right, let's look at a couple more questions here, Pastor Doug. Could you comment on the passage of Scripture, we read it, about wars and rumors of wars that Jesus mentions in Matthew 24?
Yeah, well, Jesus was saying basically, you will see wars and rumors of wars. Be not troubled. The end is not yet. So Jesus said, as soon as you see a war and the Romans invading Jerusalem, because he said that, there won't be one stone, that doesn't mean it's the end yet. Mm-hmm. And they saw many other wars since then, and the believers saw many wars since then, and we're still seeing them today. But human nature, it just seems like conquest and war has just been part of the fallen nature from the time of Nimrod and Cain killing his brother. So, and in the last days, you're going to have a repeat of Cain and Abel. You're going to have the one who worships God's way being persecuted by the one who worships his own way. Mm-hmm. So it's going to end up becoming a religious war at the end, just like it was at the beginning. And maybe this would be a good time for me to mention that in President Trump's recent State of the Union address, he said, this is our 250th anniversary from 1776. This is a big national event. He announced that there's going to be a day of prayer, May 17. It's a Sunday on the Capitol Mall, and some have wondered if there might be 1 million people there because of the new interest in revival. And the theme was, we're going to have America come back to God again. Well, that sounds wonderful, except, like I said, if it turns into religious persecution, that's not a good thing. And then, that's the day of prayer, May 17. Then, for the 4th of July, which is the 4th of July, big 250th anniversary again in Washington, and supposedly the American Pope is going to join in that celebration with our president. And amazing.
The question that we have, this is an interesting question. When will the Antichrist be revealed?
Well, I think the Antichrist has already been revealed. Mm-hmm. And, you go back to the first Pope, Pope Gregory. He said, anyone that dares to call the office of the Bishop of Rome, the chief bishop, is making him Antichrist. And so even the very first Pope, Pope Gregory was supposed to be one of the better popes, he said, you shouldn't be calling the Bishop of Rome the head of the church because you're making him out to be Antichrist by doing that. So it goes way back. Martin Luther really shone his light on it, as did John Huss and other reformers. But they believed that the Antichrist power was when the church began to use military power and enforce religion. Mm-hmm. They were doing the work that is against Christ.
And the word Antichrist is not only opposed to Christ, but it can also be understood as being in the place of Christ. Mm-hmm. And, even the papal power, the papacy itself, speaks of itself as being the representative of Christ on earth. So they have met that criteria of claiming to have the position of Jesus on the earth and controlling the church, controlling conscience.
If you say you can forgive sin,
that's
a prerogative that belongs to God. And you can even read where the popes have often said that we are God on the earth. Look it up, friends. It's hard to believe, but they do say that.
Another question that we have here. Where in prophecy does it talk about a shaking that takes place in the church, or is that happening now?
Well, Jesus talks about separating the wheat from the tares. There's a harvest. You can read in Ezekiel 9 where a mark is placed on those that sigh and cry for the abominations done, and they are spared, and those without the mark are destroyed. And so there's several parables. You get the 10 virgins are separated. There's a lot of parables that talk about separating the clean fish from the unclean fish when you cast the net out. And so this time of shaking and separation, Jesus talked about when John the Baptist, I think, talked about the Messiah would have his winnowing fan in his hand and he would separate the wheat from the chaff. That is kind of a violent process of storms of strife that separate.
Somebody's asking about the time of trouble. Where would you recommend the best place to live is during the time of trouble? Maybe before we even talk about that, Pastor Doug, could you talk a little bit about the time of trouble? What is it, and what does the Bible say?
Yeah, well, there have been several times of trouble through history. There is a historic time of trouble that came upon the church from 538 to 1798, where there was a great darkness and a great persecution, and God's church had to go underground. So you've got this historic persecution that Jesus foretold. Then immediately prior to the second coming, there's a very intense time of trouble, sort of broken into two parts. You'll have a smaller time of trouble where, well, just prior to this, I think God's people are going to be brought before kings and rulers to share our faith, and people are going to be taking their stand for or against. Some will be shaken into the church, some are shaken out. Eventually, they're going to make it illegal to buy or sell unless you cooperate with the laws of the beast. That'll be the small time of trouble. Finally, when that doesn't change people's mind and different plagues begin to fall, they're going to make a death decree. And that will be the time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation. That's when Michael stands up, probation closes. And you're saying, where should I be during that time? Well, I almost think that there's a sequence. You know, it's always better if you've got kids in a family not to live in a city center. Some people can't help it, and we don't want to condemn you for that because God may have you there, but it's always better to be in a more natural environment where you can still witness in the cities. I don't advocate, we have a place, you've been there, way up in the hills, and it's very remote, and I could stay up there all the time, be very happy, but there's a lot of lost people out there, and God has not called us to run and save ourselves. There'll be a time when we're forced to flee, and it might be good to be positioned in more suburban places where you can grow your own food, or country environments. But at some point, the Bible says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, those that be in Judea flee into the mountains. Now that's Luke. Jesus said, when you see the abomination, Jesus in Matthew, when you see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place, let those that be in Judea flee into the mountains. So when we see that they begin to make religious laws, it's going to be time for us to get out of Dodge, as they say, and be in more remote places.
All right, another question. Is Revelation talking about Russia and Turkey as Gog and Magog?
No. When you read about Gog and Magog in Genesis 10 and in Ezekiel 38 and 39, or is it 37, 38 and 39, I think, and then you read about it in Revelation chapter 20, it's talking about the ancient enemies of God's people. Do not superimpose those names. Gog and Magog, and what happens to them is exactly what happens in Revelation 20 when all the wicked are resurrected and march against the people of God. And they're marching against the New Jerusalem. So, and this is at the end of the 1,000 years. This is not happening now. So it's not Turkey, and it's not Russia, it's not China. Though they may play a role in last day prophecy, they're not Gog and Magog.
All right, another question that we have. What should Christians watch out for next in Bible prophecy? What are we looking for?
To reflect the image of Christ in our lives. When I think about current events, I'm not worried about, what's happening. I mean, I pray about the trials in the world, and there's a lot of places that are suffering. There's still suffering in Ukraine and different wars, and our hearts go out to those people. But when I think about preparing for the last days, Jesus wants to reproduce his character in me, and I want to reflect Christ. And that's my primary concern. Now, you're talking about what do we look out eschatologically? In my mind, Pastor Ross, you tell me what you think, I see that there's a shift away from some radical left ideas that have been coming out, and people are becoming more religiously inclined in North America, and that's spreading to other countries. We're seeing it in the way they vote, and people are looking again for more authentic morality. With AI, and with, now the AI weaponry, people realize that Armageddon is at our doors, and they're wondering, we've got to do something, and people are trying to find their place with God. That can go too far. And so then I think they're going to start making religious laws, and they're going to start compelling people to keep the first 4 commandments, including a Sabbath law, but it won't be on Sabbath. It'll be on what they call Sabbath Sunday. And that's going to be a problem for Christians. So I think these things are going to be issues in the not too distant future.
That's right. I mean, Jesus said in this gospel of the kingdom, We preach to all the world as a witness unto all nations. And just look at what's happening in the world today through the internet and through evangelism, through what we're doing now. The gospel is being preached in multiple languages. The Bible does speak about the papal power of the Roman Church gaining influence politically around the world. Well, that's happening. And then we also mention that, we also see in Bible prophecy that there is, within the United States, taking the lead, there's going to be a shift towards, at some point, passing religious laws, which is amazing to us right now because that would go against the Constitution. But wait and see, friends, when things start going wrong, people will surrender their freedoms for security. And we saw this happen in 9/11, where certain laws were just passed and people gave up their freedoms for safety or protection. Probably going to happen again as we near the end.
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Ross, we're nearing the end of our first hour. Do we have several questions lined up? Do you want to go a little longer, or do you think we covered the high points?
I think we got the high points by Pastor Doug, and I'm looking at the questions. They're all good, but I think we did cover most of the important ones that came up.
All right. Well, friends, you may see one more ad at the end that reminds you about the American Prophecy free offer for tonight. We hope you'll make the most of that and be praying about the situation. It's changing daily. And share the Armageddon video with your friends. I think that will encourage them. And thank you for tuning in.